Welcome to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Podcast, episode 27. My name is Alina Warwick, and today I'm extremely honored to bring on Dr. Giacomo Vacca to the show. His journey to immigration really started at the age of 16 when he left his hometown in Italy to attend school in Canada. Since he always had a desire to become a scientist, his best shot to become one was through the education system that America provided and still provides. But after a career at a Fortune 500 company, he became frustrated with all the red tape, and making a difference was almost impossible. Let's hear all about his journey and how his company grows on average 50% a year annually, consistently in the last couple of years, all grown organically. So let's dive right in. Giacomo, thank you so much for coming onto the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Podcast. I am super excited and honored to talk to you about your journey. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, thanks. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
So let's talk about your immigrant journey. Tell us where you're from and when did you come to the States?
Sure. I was born and raised in Torino, Italy. That's in the northern part of the country. I lived there until I was 16. And then I went to Canada for 2 years to an international school. And then I came to the States. And that was 87.
And so how old were you when you came to the States?
18.
18. Okay, so did you come by yourself when you moved from Italy to Canada?
Yep, all by my lonesome.
Okay, awesome. And how did you make the transition or the move from Canada to the States?
Well, I was applying to college, and so I applied to colleges in the U.S., and I was able to get in, and that's how I got into the country.
So you came at 18, and then did you study something else in Canada?
Yeah, so the school in Canada was the International Baccalaureate program, which is essentially equivalent to the last 2 years of high school or the last year of high school and the first year of college, depending which country you're from. And so I finished the high school equivalent for Italy, but I was able to essentially do the first year of college there. And then once I got into college proper, as it's understood in the United States, then I started essentially as a sophomore when I came in.
Got it. So where did you learn English?
Oh boy. So I started, I guess, when I was about 8 in a language school in Torino, and I did it every year until I left. And then once I got to Canada, then it was sink or swim, right? So that's when, I really learned conversationally to operate and to write a lot better as well. So
what was it like growing up in Italy?
Well, Italy is a wonderful country. I think most people would agree to that. I certainly do. It's an incredible place, full of history, full of culture. Food is amazing, and so on and so forth. Well, in the 70s and 80s, which is when I was growing up, I guess no matter where you're from, the fashion was just horrifying. So looking back, but of course, back then I was blissfully unaware of all that, so it didn't particularly matter. No, Italy was great. It's a wonderful place to get back to when I have a chance and to bring my family to. So yeah, for sure.
So what made you decide to leave Italy and move to Canada initially? You said you were 16 years old?
Correct. Yeah, I've always wanted, as far as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a scientist. And I wanted to kind of do my own thing. Again, as far as I can remember, I've always been very independent-minded. And so when I decided to be a scientist, I was captivated by all these science popularization programs, the equivalent of Cosmos. We didn't have Cosmos in Italy, but we had other programs like that on TV that were very popular. And so I was just captivated and just absorbing as much as I could. And then I realized that if I wanted to be a scientist, the place to do that is probably the United States, because that's where the top universities are, the top research institutions are. And so once the opportunity came along, I decided to take it. In fact, my mother was the one who provided the opportunity or identified the opportunity for me to go to this international school in Canada, because she was a principal at the time. And she came across this announcement, and then I applied and got in. It was a scholarship-based opportunity, and that was basically my stepping stone to get into North America and then eventually the United States.
Okay, got it. So what did you study when you came to the United States?
I studied physics. So I majored in physics, in my undergrad and then also in my PhD.
Got it. Got it. So tell me, I'm sure you had very little struggles coming from Canada to America, but I want to hear, did you have any struggles as an immigrant in the beginning stages?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So initially, the language was the biggest barrier, right? I remember in the very first few months of being in a English speaking environment, just like having to focus my attention like a hawk just to catch 30% of what people were saying. It was exhausting.
Yeah.
It was absolutely, it's really mentally tiring because you have to, constantly be, initially translating, figuring out, and, of course, eventually just becomes second nature. But initially that was tough.
And did you live in the dorms at your school?
Yeah. This is a residential program up in Canada. Sure, it was a very close-knit community, very small school. So it was actually kind of the perfect way to ease into a different environment like college, and for me also a culturally different environment going into the United States, because it was a very supportive, close-knit group of both students and teachers. And so it wasn't quite the cold shower going into college in the US from Italy, just without having any exposure to either the environment, the culture, the language, or anything like that. So,
And what university did you attend in the United States?
I went to Harvard.
Got it. Did you apply to any scholarships?
Yeah, you apply to whatever you can. So as an immigrant, I did look into, financial aid, scholarships, and so on and so forth. And I found very quickly that my options were limited because I wasn't eligible for any federal grants, for example, Pell grants and, all those. So I was cut out of a lot of sources of aid, but, we're lucky enough that my parents were able to, to put the money together to allow me to attend.
So before you tell our listeners about your company, tell me a little bit more about the path you took. Did you try to go into any other fields before starting your business?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, from an early age, I decided that I wanted to be a scientist, and eventually I narrowed that down to physics. And so since finishing off my master's and bachelor's and master's at Harvard, and then taking my first steps into the real world, as it were, I was operating on the basis of being a scientist and figuring out how to follow that path. And so initially, I was actually looking to an academic career at some point after my PhD. But in the course of my PhD, I sort of changed my perspective. I absorbed different experiences and kind of decided that my goals might be better suited if I were in business instead of being in academia.
Okay. And then, so out of school, did you have a job, or then out of school, did you just decide you're going to have your own business? No.
So what happened was I got my bachelor's and master's at Harvard, and then I spent 3 years working at Exxon Research. So that was my first job out of that school. And I was basically at least in my mind, a glorified technician. In everybody else's mind, it was just a peon technician. I learned a lot, and then decided that to really pursue my goals, I needed to have a PhD. And so I applied to doctorate programs, and then got into Stanford and did that.
Okay.
So once I went through my doctorate program at Stanford, after that, then I started a series of jobs at different companies. So there was a startup in the telecom field that I did for 2 years. Then I worked for another startup in the optics and lasers field. And then I was recruited by a very large company, so completely opposite end of the spectrum. So this is Abbott Laboratories. And so I worked for Abbott Laboratories for about 6 years. And after that is when I started my company.
Okay. Wow. What a journey.
Yeah.
Okay.
A few stops along the way.
Yeah. Okay. So you did research, and then you worked at startup companies. And the last startup company, you said it was what research company?
The last company I worked before starting my business.
Yes.
Oh, that was not a startup. That was Abbott Laboratories. So Abbott is a huge company, right? It's
Got it.
At least at that time was a Fortune 100.
Got it. And what were you doing there?
So I was in charge of a research group. So I was managing a research group, research programs. I was managing intellectual property. I had a lot of hats, actually, not just at the business unit that I was working at, but also at the division level up in headquarters, which is near Chicago. So I did a lot of traveling. We oversaw a lot of different projects within my group and also across the company. It was an incredible learning arena, if you will. So that's really where I got my chops in terms of managing budgets, managing people, managing projects. I learned a lot about managing, I guess, when I was there. And that was something that it was by design. So I had done research. I had done a lot of research in my doctorate, right, for my PhD. Mm-hmm. I had taken research positions before and after in industry, in startups and large companies alike, but I didn't have a lot of management experience. And so that's something that I felt that I needed to have under my belt before I went off on my own.
Got it. So at what point did you decide I'm going to leave this gigantic company managing all this and create my own business?
Well, that was 2011 is when I left Abbott and went off and, hung my shingle, as they say, and started doing my own thing.
Okay. So was it something that was at the back of your head all the time, or was there like a trigger point where you said, okay, I'm going to quit and I'm going to create something?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think back from my days as a graduate student at Stanford, I certainly got the sense that I could be an entrepreneur, that I could follow that path. But I hadn't decided yet at that point that I would do that. I was sort of in the back of my mind. When I was at Abbott, I was still, for a long time, for many years, I was thinking that I could be there for a long time. I could be there, it could be a career, it could be a long career. As long as they keep you, right? As long as you don't get laid off. So I didn't join with the intention of leaving, but I had become increasingly frustrated with, I guess, bureaucracy and the change of direction of the company, that I felt it wasn't going in the direction that I felt it should go. Mm-hmm. And I felt that even though, but like most large companies, a huge amount of resources, tremendous talent, lots of money, in various ways, in various budgets, but they're all mostly called for. And so in order to make a big impact, it takes a long time. You have to convince a lot of people, and a lot of times it doesn't go the way you want, right? It doesn't go the way you think it might or think it should. Mm-hmm. And so I felt that after enough time kind of banging my head against the wall, I decided it was time to go at it myself.
Awesome. So did you have any savings when you quit, or did you work on it on the side?
Yeah, no, I had not worked on the side. We had some savings, but the business model was initially, and to some degree continues, was to derive revenue from consulting, to basically tie us over until we have enough revenue from product sales. And so we really started with consulting, which is something that I could do. I had expertise. I had diverse experiences and things that I know quite a bit about, and so I could sell that. So that's what I did. I started selling services of various consulting services, technical and also strategic, for a number of years, and in fact continue to this day. But that was always, if you will, only one branch of the plan. So the plan involved delivering services as consulting, but it also involved developing products and ultimately selling products. And increasingly, that's what we've been doing.
Okay. And you're talking about Kinetic River?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And that was your very first company that you started?
Yes, that's right.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I started Kinetic River. It basically is incorporated in 2010, but 2011 is when I left my day job, as it were, and then started working full time for it.
Awesome. And how old were you when you started your company?
Well, 2010, I was 41.
Okay. And so tell us a little bit more about Kinetic River. What do you guys do, and what are the products that you sell?
Yeah. So we operate in the flow cytometry industry or flow cytometry field. So that's a field where people study cells, human cells mostly, but also animal and plant cells, and they use these very specialized instrumentation called flow cytometers, which are instruments that measure cells at very high speed. And so you take a sample of blood or a sample of cells from a culture, and you can analyze the cells in this sample very rapidly. And so this is something that I didn't even know existed until, after even my PhD. And so I became exposed to it through some of the work that I did in one startup. And then I just got hooked. And when I worked for Abbott, the division that I worked for, the unit that I worked for was hematology. Hematology is the study of blood. And the hematology analyzers that we developed and sold there are flow cytometers. So are the same kind of instrument that we develop and build now. There are different technologies and different aspects to them, but bottom line, they all analyze cells. And so for the last 15, 20 years almost, that has been the area of my expertise.
Wow, that's a lot of scientific terminology. Okay, so I'm interested, how did you develop that business model? How did you get into that?
Well, so with Abbott, I spent a lot of time thinking about ways of analyzing cells and came up with a number of inventions when I was there, and developed them as far as we could within the company. But there's a lot more to be invented, right? There's a lot more opportunities than we were even looking at when I was at Abbott. And so I decided, well, so that's one area that I know quite a bit about. That's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start by, just like the advice to writers is write what you know. And so the advice to consultant will be consult on what you know. So sell your expertise, because nobody is going to pay you for something you don't know anything about. So that's where the initial impetus came from. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to start consulting in the field of flow cytometry, but also in the field of optics, which is kind of what I've been doing all my life, since before my PhD. And so I think part of it is a combination of consulting on optics or on life science applications of optics, but specifically for the products, as we engaged with customers and as we talked to clients, we started getting some ideas about what we could do that could be different. It could be protected, right, from an intellectual property standpoint. And it also could be a differentiator in terms of products. And so now we've developed a portfolio which is growing all the time. We're adding products as we go. And we started by selling products mostly into niche areas of flow cytometry where nobody else is playing. And so that's one way that, we can corner a bit of the market. But at the same time, we're developing products that have a lot broader applicability, a lot more appeal for the mass market. And so those take a bit longer to develop and refine because they have to satisfy a lot of requirements. So they have to check a lot of boxes, in other words.
Okay. So who are your major clients? Are these hospitals, clinics, researchers? Who are your clients?
Yeah, so our main clients are researchers. So in the field of life science research and biomedical research in general, there's this model where an institution or a hospital will have what's called a core lab. So a core laboratory where expensive machines are bought on behalf of a number of users. All right. So you might have a hospital or a university with 20, 30, 50, 100 different researchers. They can't each afford one of these machines, but they can afford to share time on one of these machines. So the core laboratory is kind of generally is managed centrally and allocates time to the machines to each of the users. So those are typically the people that we try to sell our machines to. It's the core laboratory directors and managers.
And the health industry is booming. So that's an awesome industry to be in.
Right. That's one area of human endeavor that doesn't typically seem to be affected very much by recessions. And this recession in particular is, of course, tragic and dramatic and so forth. But at the same time, there's a lot of demand, right, for things that can impact people's lives and make them better.
Right. So you guys are bulletproof. You guys are set.
Well, call it bulletproof, but it's a nice area to be in. It's a nice field to be in.
So Giacomo, where do you think you got your entrepreneurial drive from?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I can put my finger on it. I guess I've always been drawn to doing things differently. I guess that's one way to one thing that you can say is that, so my path in school was very different from most people. As I mentioned, I went to Canada to finish high school, then I came to the States. I did my college there and did a master's degree attached to the bachelor's degree, which is again not particularly common. Then it took 3 years and worked for 3 years before going on to my PhD. So none of that is how people normally do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I generally look for, it's a bit like the investment advice that people give, right? So don't go where everybody is buying, because you're going to be paying a lot of money for it, right? For those stocks. You look for areas that are undervalued, and then you try to get in there before anybody else. So if you're just following the herd, you're not going to get any deals. And so that's a bit of, in very simple words, is kind of my approach is, let's try not to go after where everybody else already is, because what's the fun in that? And it's probably not much of an upside in that direction.
So did you have to raise any capital to start your business?
No, but I wish I had. Well, so let me qualify that answer, right? So no, I did not raise any capital. We did not go after venture capital or institutional investors. We didn't even go after angels, to be honest. And so everything we've done has been self-funded initially and eventually funded from the company, right? From the revenue from the company. So we became profitable right away.
Wow.
And we were able to, weather lean years, essentially by gritting our teeth quite a bit, but we managed to continue and to survive and do well. In fact, thrive. So over the last 6 years, we've had a annual growth of average about 50% per year.
Wow.
Which is for an organically grown company is huge.
Did you say 50% a year?
Right.
Wow.
So the first few years, we're different.
Yeah.
We're not like that. But for the last 6, we've managed that. So initially, it was just savings and being laser focused on getting immediate revenue from consulting services. So all told, I think the total amount of money that I lent to the business initially was about $30,000, and eventually I paid it all. Pretty soon paid it all back. There were a few more instances where I had to lend the company some money, but again, all of that has been paid back. So we have no debt, right? We have no investors, so we can chart our own path.
That's actually really powerful, because that's a really good business model to have. And you guys survived and thrived. And I wanted to ask, where did you guys do any marketing in the beginning stages, any digital marketing, paid advertising, or was it kind of word of mouth marketing?
Yeah, this is a good question. So it's something that I constantly think about and try new things, right? So initially it was just word of mouth, just contacting the people in my network, getting the word out there. Eventually, we initially put up a very, very simple website on Weebly, 4 pages. But pretty quickly we realized, okay, we need something a little bit more professional. So hired somebody to do a professional website for us, and so that served us for several years. And then a couple of years ago, then we did a complete revamp, and so it's something that you never stop working on, right? So our newsletters, right? So we started off, with maybe it was 1,000 recipients, and now it's 3,000, right? So we keep adding people from trade shows, from people I used to meet at trade shows. Yeah. Hopefully we get to meet people at trade shows again soon. But yeah, it's something you constantly try to improve. We never took advertising, right? We never paid for AdWords on Google or something like that. But we did spend quite a bit of time thinking about how to optimize our our luck cross section. With website and with newsletter and with direct mailings to specific segments of people in our network, and then trade shows, right? For trade shows and workshops in our field have been very useful to kind of reach out to the people that we need to talk to. But we've been very fortunate in that so again, it's a little bit like having several businesses in one, right? Because the consulting service is one business, the product business is a separate business model altogether, but it's all under the same roof because they're synergistic. They all feed into each other. So with the service business, there are a lot of referrals, right? People who just, and they keep doing that. They know about Kinetic River. People in my network know about us, and they send people our way when there's something that they hear we might be able to help with. And so that's tremendously helpful. And I try to pay it back, right? So anytime there's something that comes across my desk that I don't know or can't help with, I try to find somebody that it might be their cup of tea. So that kind of mutual assistance is certainly a big part of establishing a consulting business, a consulting practice. For products, it's a little bit different, right? Because it's a different kind of customer, it's a different kind of use, it's a different dollar amount, and so on and so forth. So there we had to figure out what the need was, how to reach the people who needed the products that we were making, and then target it to them with marketing and specific mailers.
You're doing so much. I love it.
Well, it is. A business is a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah.
Never seems to end. It certainly never seems to end for me. But it's a tremendous learning ground, right? Because I've had to teach myself. So that's one thing that in grad school, right? In grad school, you learn to teach yourself everything you need to know. Because most of the time, at least in my experience, there was nobody there to teach it to you. And many times there isn't anybody who actually knows. So you do have to figure it out from scratch. And so that served me incredibly well, right? In my journey as an entrepreneur, because I've had to teach myself. So set aside all the technical stuff, right? It's all the legal, all the bureaucratic, like making sure that you comply with federal paperwork for grants, and I won't bore you with the detail, but it's a tremendous amount of things that you have to keep on the tip of your fingers. And so knowing how to do that quickly is something that has served me in very good stead.
And especially having a business in California. Oh my goodness.
I guess, yeah. I don't have experience of having a business anywhere else.
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah, but good stuff. So did you have any mentors that helped you out to start your business?
I try to ask questions and talk to as many people as I possibly could. And there were many, right? So I try to get advice from everybody I talk to, everybody I met. It's like see somebody who's successful or has something that I think I can aspire to or I can use, and say, how did you do that? What was your path? What pitfalls did you get into? So I just voraciously try to absorb wisdom from others, and that was my way to try not to make too many mistakes on my own. Of course, you make plenty, right? Every entrepreneur makes enough mistakes of their own that they can write books. But talking to people at whatever stage of their journey, I always found it very, very instructive. I guess in particular, this I've been in very close collaboration with for over 10 years now. His name is Sean Murphy, and I met him because he was hosting a bootstrappers breakfast, and it still does. He actually hosts it in many cities across the country. But the one that I started attending, goes back more than 10 years ago, is in Mountain View. And it's just a place where people get together. He moderates, he and Teresa moderate, and people come with, hey, I don't know if I should incorporate as a C corporation or as an S corporation or an LLC. What do you guys think? And so there's, 5, 10, 12, 15 people around the room and say, well, this is what I went through. This is what I can tell you. So there's this back and forth of advice, questions and advice. And so that was extremely helpful. And then, of course, with Sean, he also became a co-founder of another company that we started together called Beamwise. So we've had an extensive collaboration and partnership ever since. But I found that he was, very tremendously helpful in terms of the amount of things that he's seen in terms of startups and businesses, and the things that he advised us on when we were getting going. Okay,
so you just dropped another nugget. You have another company?
Oh, yeah. That's right. Right. So this is a company that I started with Sean and two other fellows. So Beamwise is a company that has some synergy with Kinetic River, but it's quite different in terms of the business model. We actually develop software for optical system design. So it's to help people design complex assemblies, complex instruments, if you will, that are optics based. And so, of course, that's one of the things we do at Kinetic River. And so we've had a lot of use for BeamWise. And so that's where the synergy comes in.
Okay. So do you still have that company?
Yeah. It's
so you run two companies.
That's right. Yeah. So I run primarily Kinetic River, so that I'm president and CEO or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's my main focus. But with BeamWise, I'm a chief science officer. So I advise on what is the application, what should we be thinking about in terms of features and so on and so forth.
Okay, so looking back at your immigrant entrepreneur career and knowing what you know now, would you want to change anything or do anything differently?
Yeah, I would start with a lot more money.
Valuable advice.
Well, not always easy to say, but not easy to do, of course, right? Because who has set aside $250,000 just for a rainy year or two? And if I had that, of course, it would have saved me a near nervous breakdown or two. So it's certainly, I paid a price for not seeking angel capital right away or ever, right? Mm-hmm. For bootstrapping and doing things essentially completely on my own. I mean, we did have family to help financially for a while, and so that was extremely helpful and very, very much appreciated. But we never had a big chunk of money that came from an investor, and so that meant that it was difficult initially. Eventually, we started getting into a very good groove. We found, basically, we developed enough and perfected enough of the initial, very early stage of our technology that we could start getting grants. And so we started getting grants from the NIH at a good clip. And so that's been a tremendous help for us over the years. So once we hit that stride, things really started blossoming, right? So we started hiring people, we expanded, we were able to do more with what we had. So everything changed quite rapidly once we hit that, but it took a few years.
Got it. So grants really helped you guys, propelled you to go to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, so, a startup is not the same as every other startup. So if you have a software-based startup, so you can keep your expenses very, very low. You can do everything in the cloud. You don't have to, hire a lot of people necessarily. You can do, virtual or remote work. When you're doing a hardware startup, it's 100 times more difficult. It is expensive, particularly as you get into the later stage of development. And you just, you can't do it alone. And so it is helpful to have the government recognize that startups of this kind need help. And so the NIH does, and the NSF does, and other agencies of the government also do, and select proposals that seem promising. And that is a fantastic vehicle. It's called the SBIR, right? The Small Business Innovation Research Program. Has been fantastically helpful, not just to us, but to tens of thousands of companies around the country.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
So I'm really interested to know, how do you look at failures and how do you overcome them?
Well,
this is deep.
Sure. It is a deep question. I mean, there's all sorts of kinds of failures, right? You can spend a lot of time on a proposal and then it comes to nothing, right? So the worst kind of failure, I think, is so you generate a lot of proposals and a fraction of them will be accepted, and then you deliver them and they pay you, hopefully. And I have not had the displeasure of being stiffed by too many people. In fact, when something was commissioned and then we delivered, we were always paid. Where I had the displeasure was where I might have spent 50 hours on generating an extremely detailed proposal with all the plans and all the details, and I give it to the customer, the prospective customer, and then they say, "This is fantastic. We'll sign this in the morning," and then never hear from them, and then you realize that they gave the bid to the other bidder, to your competitor, maybe even using the very detailed proposal that you spend so much time on as a blueprint for
Wow.
doing the work. So, it's a lesson you learn pretty quickly. So, you don't spend 50 hours on the proposal unpaid. And so that became the new policy, right? So you spend enough time to give the customer a sense for what's going to be in the deliverable, and make sure that you get paid adequately for it. But you certainly don't give them the blueprint until they put some skin in the game. But so I guess that's one way to say that this may sound trite, but it's really true, right? A lot of stereotypes are true in many ways, or at least they have a nugget of truth. And so the triteness is that failure is a learning opportunity, and it's really true, right? So from that particular failure, because I spent all this time and got nothing for it, I learned that I shouldn't be spending so much time on a proposal, and so I never did again. And so on you learn, right, and on you live. So it's a matter of not feeling beaten down too much by any particular setback. I guess the overarching principle for any failure is, don't never give up, right? It's absolutely the rock bottom thing, and it's also a stereotype or cliche, but it must be part of what an entrepreneur does. If you give up on the overall arc of what you're doing, then all bets are off, right? That doesn't mean that you should continually pursue something that is doomed to fail, right? Once it's clear that is a dead branch, then it should absolutely be abandoned. But that doesn't mean that you give up on entrepreneurship or give up on your company or give up on your dreams. And, there's giving up and giving up.
Did you at any point in time in your entrepreneurial ventures ever have a day that you wanted to give up? Or did you kind of just pursue and move forward after all these failures and mistakes?
Well, there were many days early on, in particular, where the finances were like awful, where it was very difficult, right? But even in the middle of that, I didn't seriously consider giving up. It was like, okay, well, this is really tough. How do I get out of it, right? Not how do I abandon ship, is how do I steady it? How do I keep it afloat? How do I get out of this pickle without throwing in the towel? And so that was, I guess that's what's kept me going. It's just the fact that I was very adamant about not giving up.
That's powerful advice. Thank you. Thank you. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about successes. Are there any successes that you would like to outline from your immigrant entrepreneur journey?
So when you do something that you feel is the best that you can do, and the customer or client recognizes that and acknowledges it, that is a tremendous rush, right? It's a wonderful feeling of validation, right? So I would say that those are some of the most rewarding moments, is when you work your sweet tuchus to the bone, and you get something that is generally a lot more than what the customer actually asked for, because that's how we operate. That's another thing that we do, is we try to do above and beyond, right? We try to make sure that the customer is absolutely thrilled with the results, even at our expense, even to the detriment of our profit, because that engenders goodwill, and that engenders repeat business, and that engenders referrals. And so we generally, I specifically, but the company as a whole, we try very hard to do more than even was agreed on, and give them something extra, right? So that they can be really happy with the results. And so once they receive that and say, wow, this is really awesome, that's a great feeling. So that is absolutely fantastic. I have to say that personally, some of the most rewarding feelings for me come from invention, right? Because I'm an inventor. That's kind of how I decided to be an entrepreneur, is by following kind of the ideas that I had. And the very first invention, I wasn't an entrepreneur then yet. I was still working for another company, but I got my first, the acknowledgement, right? So the patent issues, and then the USPTO says, congratulations, your patent has issued. That was the first one I received. And I felt, wow, there it is. It says here, I'm an inventor. Maybe you felt all your life, but now it's in print. It's a government that says so. It must be true.
Did you frame that? Did you frame it?
We framed, So I have 54 patents now on the wall. And so, but every one of them is like this is great, right? This is something that we can point to as evidence that we are very innovative, right? We create things out of nothing. And that is one of the things that, certainly in technology, entrepreneurship is very important. It's important to have something that differentiates you. And to differentiate your products, there's various ways of doing it. But in tech, you generally have to have a novel idea.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I noticed something very interesting when I was looking through your LinkedIn profile. I saw that you speak Chinese, French, German, Italian, and Spanish, and obviously English. Where did you pick up all of these languages?
Oh, that's kind of like my hobby almost. I can't say honestly that I speak fluently any of those except for Italian and English anymore. At some point, I did speak fluently German, rather fluently, and more or less fluently Chinese. French, maybe so-and-so, and Spanish, so-and-so. But it's always been a absolutely fun thing for me. Is I was always fascinated by languages, and I couldn't get enough of them. I studied English and German in school, and then I picked up Chinese and then studied that, and traveled to Taiwan and China to learn it better. So it's always been, it's been a lifelong thing for me, picking up languages. I've always enjoyed it.
Wow. And Chinese. I mean, that's something completely different from all the other ones.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Good stuff. So is giving back, either volunteering time or giving back to the community, something that is part of your business values?
So I would say that it's more than part of our business values. It's the entire reason of being of the business, right? Because what we're trying to do is to create solutions that help people fight disease, that help people stay healthier longer. And so the entire business model is aimed at making sure that there's as wide an impact as we can of that particular thought and urge. And so, we are doing what we think is ultimately going to result in instruments and products that hopefully will be adopted very widely. And where they're adopted, they can make a big difference. And so that's really the underlying current is why are we so passionate about what we're doing, is because this is not another another gaming app. Not there's anything wrong with games, but right. There's a different importance between something that is something you do in your leisure is something that your mother or your father or your sister's life depends on. There's clearly a different level of importance to that. And so I think that is where our entire ethos comes from in terms of values and being passionate about what we do.
So what are some things that you would advise the next aspiring immigrant that wants to start their own business listening to you right now?
So if they want to call me, I can keep them on the phone for several hours. But I would say that having at least a bit of a runway is better than having no runway financially, right? Mm-hmm. So whether it's borrowing some money from family and friends or having some savings so that you can launch and have, 6 months ideally at least of not any paycheck whatsoever, that would certainly be advisable. I would also advise them to get as much experience as you can, but not let that be an excuse not to start, right? So as I said, I started my entrepreneurship journey in my early 40s. I actually started it before that because I started learning about and studying and talking to people. And as I mentioned, right, anybody I talked to, I bend their ear backwards trying to find out how they did it or what advice they had for me. And so I did that for several years before I actually jumped ship. Mm-hmm. And I would advise them to do the same. I'd advise them to learn as much as possible about what they're going to need, what they're going to have to do, what decisions they're likely to have to make, and essentially put as much in place as possible before they leave the comfort and security of their existing paycheck. There's some entrepreneurs that jump into, starting a venture right out of school. For some it works, for some it bombs horribly. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't advise it. I would advise them to get experience in the field that they're interested in and really learn from an established business, from inside an established business, what's going on, become an expert in some area, and find out what is still out there in terms of unmet needs. And once you have the inside scoop on what that is, then you can take a jump and figure out a way to fill that need on your own.
Such valuable advice. Thank you. Thank you. And where did you find those mentors? You mentioned you met some at trade shows, but did you go into any meetups or any groups? Did you join any groups like that? Or where did you find your mentors?
No, that's actually a very good question. Yeah. So I didn't mention that one of the very first things I did after I left my job at a large company was, I don't even remember how I found out about it, but maybe through an email or somebody forwarded me something. It was a consultants group here in Silicon Valley. It's called the Consultants Network of Silicon Valley, CNSV. And I met a lot of very interesting people, most extremely helpful, and certainly plenty of wisdom and experience there. Not all of them necessarily on their own as consultants, but many of them with plenty of advice. And so that kind of community and group, of which I'm still part of, is definitely one that I've drawn a lot of mutual wisdom from. And like that, there were others. The Bio to Device group, for example, still runs, even though it's in pandemic mode. It's a meetup dedicated to medical devices and the new pharmaceutical innovation and medical instrumentation. And so that kind of meetup is another place where I met a lot of people. In fact, I met the first person I hired for Kinetic River at that meetup and just got exposed to a lot of interesting ideas. And so these kinds of networks and groups are, I think, extremely useful in broadening your network, broadening your outlook, and giving you a different perspective.
Awesome. So powerful. So to wrap up, I have these super, super fast and easy questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay. What time do you normally start your day?
You mean what time do I get in the office or what time do I get up?
What time do you get up?
I get up at about 6 to 6:30.
Awesome. How many employees do you have?
Right now we have 5. We've had 6, 5, 4. It kind of fluctuates, but we're more or less steady right now at about 5, 6, and we're going to look into a new phase of expansion next year.
Awesome. Awesome. Love it. How often do you watch TV in a week?
Oh, that's actually the one thing that I allow myself to wind down and chill. Right now I have a decent sized commute to and from work. And so by the time I get home, I'm done.
Yeah.
Except when I'm not done and I have to do another report before I go to sleep, if I go to sleep at all. So that does happen, but not every day, thankfully. But there's a lot of times when I have to keep working after I get home, and that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah. So the last question leads me to your working schedule. How many hours of work do you normally put in, say, in a week on an average? I know it fluctuates.
Yeah. So 60 plus.
Hopefully it's not 100 plus.
No, it has been 100 plus on very, very few occasions. Yeah, it has been absolutely crazy. There's some projects where there's just so much work that like getting up to go to the bathroom is a challenge. And so those are like 14, 15, 16-hour days. Thankfully, there's not too many of those in a row, although there are. Thankfully, there's not that many all-nighters that I've had to pull anymore. In my earlier days, grad school and all, and early work years, I pulled quite a few, and they're awful. I hate it, but you got to do it. In fact, I pulled one just about 4 months ago again because it just had to be done by a certain deadline, and there's nothing else I could do.
Yeah. And you're also pursuing the quality work. So I'm sure your quality work speaks volumes in all those dedicated hours. So
you kind of have to sleep in order to do some decent quality work. And so, once you get into, well, I need to crank this out, then you try to time it so that you do your thinking work when you're still awake. And then you do your turn the crank work for when you're in the 2 or 3 in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Giacomo, thank you so much for coming on my show. You are giving back in so many ways and changing the world in many ways. Thank you so much for what you're doing out there. And you're such an inspiration to so many immigrants listening to you. Thank you.
Alina, it's been my pleasure, and I'm the one to thank you for reaching out to me. It's great to talk to you, and I appreciate your initiative. I certainly hope that some people get something out of this if they hear it.
Thank you. Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I just wanted to ask if you can give me a quick shout out wherever you're at listening to this podcast. I'd love to give you a shout out as well on a future episode of mine. Also, if you're an immigrant entrepreneur listening to this show and would love to be featured on my podcast, go ahead and email me and we'll get connected. I'll see you guys all next time for another exciting and impactful episode. Take care.